Without further ado, let's get today's panel started. Delivering digital identity, ROI you can expect with biometrics. We have a very esteemed panel joining us on the virtual stage, Joni Brennan, Franklin Garrigue, and Joe Palmer. Before I open it up for the broader discussion, Joni, would you mind starting us off with just a little bit about your background, what you do at DIAC, maybe for those who aren't familiar with DIAC, and maybe a little bit of your resume, why you are such a knowledgeable expert here within the digital identity space?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to participate in the panel today. It's a real pleasure and honor, and I certainly love participating at One World Identity and No Identity. So a little bit about me, I'm Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, often known as DIAC. DIAC has been established as a result of Canada's Federal Payments Task Force that was reviewing our electronic payment system. That was back in the global financial crash of 2008, 2009. We were created based on the recommendation by that report under the Minister of Finance, which said that Canada's payment system needed a digital ID and authentication framework, and that framework should be developed by the public and private sector in a self-governing body. So that's our mandate. That is also why you will see one of the reasons you'll see a strong financial sector participation in the DIAC. We actually look at identity through the challenge of delivering economic benefits for all. So we're an economic benefits driven organization. Identity is the way that we see ourselves getting there. We are developing and delivering the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is an industry standard for the set of requirements around different functionalities for identity. We're also delivering proofs of concept and educational materials. We are really at the center of excellence, I would say, in terms of real world expertise for identity in Canada. How did I get into the space? I studied information technology and informatics at Rutgers University. We happen to be geolocated next to the IEEE Standards Association. It's a global, the largest global academic standards developing association in the world. So I thought standards are a fantastic way to work across many diverse stakeholders that are working on a common problem to make big impact for how technology intersects with humanity. So that's a bit about how I got here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, how about yourself? You are president of the Americas at iProve. Maybe a bit about your background and a quick intro to iProve as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cameron. So yeah, as you said, I'm president of iProve Inc., which covers the Americas. I've been based just outside of DC for about a year now. Coming over just before the pandemic struck. And prior to that, I was based in London, focused on technology. So I was actually the first employee of iProve way back in 2011, 2012. Originally built the early prototypes, moved on to focusing on the SDKs and the APIs and the integrations, quite customer facing, before ending up being kind of strategically and commercially focused over here. Prior to that, I did a computer science degree in University College London, and I've been a kind of a techie at heart and for most of my career. A bit about iProve, actually. I should probably tell you a little bit about what we do. So iProve provides remote genuine presence assurance. So this is biometric verification using your face, but ensuring that the person is not only the right person and that they're a real person, but they're there right now. So we provide what we call a one-time biometric to ensure that the biometric data supplied for remote face-based verification is unique to that session and never repeats in that user's lifetime. So we can provide our solution to banks, governments, and other enterprise for secure remote user authentication and verification.
Thank you. And Franklin, last but not least, a little bit about your background and your role at TD Bank would be great.
Hi, Cameron. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure, and in a very esteemed forum. Thank you for having me. I'm with TD Bank, based out of Toronto. I'm part of the teams in digital, part of the digital teams, and my focus has been mostly on innovative files such as open banking, digital identity, and things like that. I'm also a board member of DIAC, so I get to know Joni quite well, as well as a board member of FDX, the Financial Data Exchange, both in the US and in Canada, standards for open banking solutions. As part of my role, I've rolled out several ID proofing solutions for the bank, for TD, and some of them using biometrics. And so excited to talk about this topic. It's one with a lot of momentum.
Indeed, I think momentum is a great way of putting it. So, maybe before we dive into some of the more nuanced levels of discussion, I think it's helpful to maybe start with some terms of art. And I think facial biometrics maybe gets a bad rap in the sense people struggle to differentiate between facial recognition, the use of facial biometrics for identity verification. When we're talking about, facial recognition versus verification, what are the key differences there, and how are these technologies different, and how are they being used in a different fashion?
I can jump in and give a start to that answer. I think in its simplest form, face recognition is where you have one-to-many. So you have a face and you're looking that face up in a database to see if you know who that person is. Versus verification is a one-to-one. So someone presents a face and they are asserting an identity, and you're then confirming whether that person is or isn't that identity. So that's in its simplest form, but actually when you kind of break that down to determine what that actually means, typically a verification, the user is participating in that process. They know it's happening, they're collaborating with it, they have to assert an identity to start with. They're benefiting from it, they're signing up to a bank account, they're logging in, they're doing what they're trying to do, and they control the privacy of it. They can delete their account, they know they're offering their data up, and then they're in control of the use of that data. Whereas recognition is often used in surveillance, and this is what often gives face biometrics a bad name, is that you don't know it's happening, you're not collaborating, you're not participating in a way that you can control the privacy and the use of that biometrics. So they're very, very different in terms of their use cases and actually even their underlying algorithms. And at iProof, we only do verification, and for digital identities, that is a verification use case. And recognition and the surveillance and that side of the world is a very different thing.
So, in thinking about biometrics, there are a number of different modalities available out there in the market. You have face, you have finger, you have palm. You can go as deep as iris or voice print, or I guess any. Skin galvanic is another one. There's any number of methods that you can use to try and kind of take an attribute from an individual human and create a map against that. When we're looking at the market today, why is face emerging as one of the more popular modalities? And what are some of those factors that go into, from an organizational perspective, deciding what modality is the right fit for a given application, and why do we feel face is emerging as one of the more popular options in this verification space?
I can jump in again if helpful, at least start us off. I think face is very popular because the vast majority of devices today have a front-facing camera, or a camera that's designed to look at the user using the device. We're all using one now. So it's the most ubiquitous sensor when it comes to the sensors you need to read and measure biometrics. It's also the only biometric that is printed or embedded in basically every government-issued identity card or database. So it is the only biometric that can link a person to an identity. Biometrics are used, Face ID and Touch ID, they're great, but they are just confirming you are the same person as you were. They're not actually confirming who you are from a government-issued identity perspective. So Face is easy to use, it's available on the vast majority of devices, and it can provide identity assurance as well. And I think that's why it's starting to emerge as the front runner.
I might add that the technology has also made tremendous progress in the recent years on facial recognition, facial verification, really. And it's to the point that a model verifying a face versus a document face is the error rate is in the basis points, like 0.1% or even hundreds of a percent. When a person matching two faces may be in the percent of error. So the machines are considerably better than the humans at recognizing, at verifying a piece of identity. So it's amazing how much progress has been made. So I think it's for all these reasons and the reasons Joe said, face is very popular. I would also mention, however, there are some use cases for which face is not necessarily the ideal. And it's use cases when you need to identify the person at the same time as obtain their authorization. Because it's easy to get it wrong and say, oh, I flash your face and I think you've, I recognize you and I think you've approved this, but no, you may not have. And so this is why the iPhone 10 requires you to double click when you want to pay at the POS. Or there's several ways of doing that. Alipay has used Smile to Pay. When you check out on these facial recognition based software, you have to smile to confirm that you're authorizing the payment, not just being recognized. Or it's also no accident that Amazon Go Amazon is testing its checkout palm recognition systems, because a palm is more of an intentional movement as opposed to just taking a picture of my face. And so when there is identity and authorization at the same time, face may not be the ideal, or there's different ways of doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And Joe, piggybacking on something that you had mentioned previously in thinking about, the ubiquity of cameras and the potential for, I guess, cross-device capabilities, cross-platform capabilities that might not rely on a proprietary sensor, something like fingerprint. I think that's really important. Joni, to bring you into the conversation, how is DIAC thinking about standards across organizations, across the industry? Obviously, that's kind of one of the major roles that you play, is trying to ensure that we don't end up with, 50 different standards across 50 different organizations. How is DIAC thinking about biometrics and, whether it's modalities or whether it's individual applications or sensor types, and ensuring that we're building towards an interoperable future and not repeating some of these mistakes of the past when it comes to everyone being stuck in their own lane and not being able to collaborate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to the previous question on why face is kind of emerging as so popular, I think the one word that I didn't hear as well that I would add in is convenience. There is a huge convenience factor that's there for the user on the use of that facial biometric. So, but in terms of the standards, what I would say in our DIAC process, our DIAC approach is to identify and develop. And so, for example, if we see a need in terms of a new standard or a problem that needs to be solved and addressed with a standard as a tool, we will do a scan first to ensure that there's not an existing standard out there that we can simply adopt and create an efficiency with and be a part of a community in that way. And so we always work to first identify if that standard is needed and to adopt by reference where appropriate, and then to develop when we find that, when we find that there is not something that already exists. From a biometric standards perspective, we do have a lot of discussions with the Biometrics Institute, for example. There's lots of work that they've been championing, as well as what's happening with ISO on the international front. From a Canadian perspective and a Canadian principle perspective, one of the things that the members are discussing right now is the approach or adoption for what exists around the ethical use of biometrics. And so there is discussion that's happening there. And one of the things that we're talking about with regard to the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework is that the biometric is represented as an authentication mechanism as part of how authentication can be performed. And so we're working to determine the technical currency as to if biometrics needs to be represented as its own functionality, as its own component, or if it's handled well enough where it is. And so when we're looking at that standards ecosystem, we want to see, does something already exist that we can adopt and we can be part of a broader community, because that's a good thing. If not, we want to develop. And we always also need to keep that technical currency, because what we believed and codified today about biometrics, that whole landscape could change in 6 months to a year. So we have to continue to keep current. And so that's the process that we apply to all of the work that we do. And that's how we embed this, that efficiency into the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework as well.
And Franklin, banks, right or wrong, I think in some ways are often viewed as, technology laggards. I think some of that is with good reason, in the sense that, it makes sense that the institution trusted with safeguarding folks' finances are maybe not leaping out to grab onto the newest and latest technologies without making sure that they're battle tested and proven before adopting. But also, I think banks have a particular interest in seeing a return on investment in, these technology investments that they do make. Where have you seen the most uplift in terms of a real dollars and cents benefit to the adoption of biometrics? Is it merely like you mentioned, just getting that efficiency in the sense that your error rate is dropping down to basis points from percentages, or is it also just being able to take advantage of human beings being tasked with what they're good at and letting the machines kind of specialize in what they're good at, which is, for example, comparing two things and making sure they're identical?
Yeah, there's a few dimensions, quite frankly, Cameron. Like historically, we've used biometrics as part of the various means to authenticate someone. Right? It's people talk about what you have, what you are, what you know, and obviously what you are is very aligned with biometrics. And so we've been using biometrics, among others, to enhance security. And this was the main driver for use of biometrics historically. So when Apple and others, when device manufacturers launched biometrics, we jumped on it and used it. We felt it was a secure solution without creating more risks or new risks. However, in the past years, and COVID has really accelerated the movement, we're now using it increasingly for identity proofing and onboarding customers. And here we're seeing a lot of lift in that it makes the process simpler, more convenient, not a lot of friction. And at the same time, it has reached now a level of precision, a level of quality. The pass-through rate, the success rate is high enough that it makes it quite effective. And so both for effectiveness and frictionless reasons, we find that customers are embracing it and enjoying it, and it makes our processes better. And this has a direct impact on the bottom line. Our KYC processes are quite costly and quite complex. And so anything that can make them smoother and more effective is very welcome. It has a big impact.
Joe, from your perspective, with customers coming in, kicking the tires on the iProve solution, would you say that a direct cost is one of the benefits that they're seeing in adopting this, or are they what other levers are you seeing from your customers that they're looking to play with when it comes to justifying the adoption of a biometric solution?
Yeah, cost is a big factor often. Often a bank, for example, is replacing a manual process. So some of our early customers were seeing their future customers not signing up because the online only banks, the neobanks of the world, were allowing people to sign up on their couch. So they had to compete, and actually they discovered that the cost of doing a remote KYC process was actually an order of magnitude cheaper than the fully loaded cost of actually processing someone in a branch. So from an ROI perspective, that's kind of a no-brainer. But actually then there's the benefits to the bank is the cost saving, but the benefits to the customer is the fact that every couch becomes an extension to the bank. You can have a branch in every living room almost. So can we make a user experience that provides the ability to cross-sell and upsell as you would normally expect to do within a branch, And the answer is actually they're different, but yes, you can. You create one single digital account, and you can apply for mortgages or credit cards or savings accounts. You know that you can leverage that identity across the bank. So yeah, customer experience is the driver from a customer perspective. Cost saving is often a driver from the bank's perspective, but actually security, the ability to protect against fraudulent applications is more recently becoming a significant focus. You know, the pandemic has moved so many processes online that the fraudsters are just evolving. And actually, you know, the amount of digital fraud that has occurred in the last year is quite staggering. You know, the amount of money that's been lost and given away in benefits to fake identities, or people's identities have been stolen, is huge. So actually, the security aspect is a big driver for the adoption of these services. And as Franklin said, now we're in a position that we've reached the point in the ability to actually do this securely, easily, and cost effectively.
You know, I think you mentioned COVID, which obviously has been a fundamental shift in the consumer relationship with these platforms. But I think beyond that, just thinking about the broader user experience, being able to eliminate friction and you know, points of cost, like for example, password recovery, I think are top of mind for all types of organizations because these things are so costly. Joni, from your perspective, do you see biometrics ever maybe unseating? You know, I know the death of the password is like, we've been talking about the death of the password for as long as I've been alive, it feels like. Do we think biometrics could be poised to finally deal a death blow to the traditional username and password, or from Diak's perspective, do we see the password kind of still hanging around like this zombie, you know, haunting all of us for years to come?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the rumors of the password's death are greatly over exaggerated. You know, I think it's something that we all are, as a community, pushing toward. But I also think it's going to take a long time. It's going to take time to get there. So I think the answer to your question is that yes, I do believe that biometrics is one of the sets of tools that will unseat the ubiquitous use of the password as we know it today. We're not quite there yet, but I do think that that's going to be an important tool. I think one of the things, you know, I've been working in the identity standards and innovation space for about 20 years, and I would say that one of the things that I've noted over that time is that rarely does a technology come in and completely unseat the old technology. We're really working in an additive ecosystem. And so even while we have seen, you know, distributed ledger and blockchain come into the picture, and biometrics come into the picture, we still see technologies like still deployed, OpenID, SAML. So, you know, the historical technologies are still going to be there, I think, for a while. But each time we move forward, we do move that adoption space, and we have the opportunity to put the password further into the rear view mirror than it is today. So I think it's going to be a very important tool, not the only tool. And I think the lessons learned, such as what Franklin was talking about making sure you actually have that authorization with that authentication, that's a real operational lesson that's been put into play to manage, to mitigate risk and to mitigate how that biometric is used. So I think it's a very powerful tool in the toolbox, and that'll continue to grow.
I'll echo that a little bit, like to give a practical example. I completely agree. I think the password, you now can do a lot of transactions without your password. Password is becoming a bit of a backup. If I give examples, you may unlock your banking app without your password by using your face recognition on your phone or your thumb recognition. Then you may order a payment and validate that payment without your password. You may, in Canada, you may share identity from your bank with another institution or another relying party without your passport by just authenticating with your bank and approving it. You can do all that. Now, if it fails, password is here as a backup, but I think we're well on the way to killing the passwords.
And so to to paraphrase, it sounds like we really see biometrics as potentially abstracting away a lot of those pain points. For example, password recovery, authentication for ongoing transactions. The password's not going to die, but it maybe is just going to be, the skeleton will remain in the closet, and it's there. We can't throw it out, but we don't have to see it all the time and remind us that it's there.
Well, I think too, if you think about authentication as something you know, something you have, something you are, that's really when you're getting strong. And so, the examples that Franklin gave, I think, is a great illustration of the password is not secure. It's wildly less secure than the biometric is. So having that use of the biometric for authentication puts the password, it's there as a backup. Yes, absolutely, you still have it, but we're actually up leveling the level of authentication by putting the biometric more into the forefront. So we still have it, but it's more appropriately, the level of security on the password is more appropriately represented.
Yeah, a secure password is not very usable, and a usable password is not very secure. So it is a trade-off. There is no middle ground there. So by not having to use the password every time you're authenticating, then it's not so tempting to make it a nice and easy password or PIN, because you have to type it in every 5 minutes. So that should help as well. But yeah, so I think there's going to be it's going to coexist for some time, and biometrics should slowly be the primary factor, with the password tending to be the kind of the fallback or recovery mechanism.
Well, I think we dove into this a little bit with this previous round of questions. But one of the favorite things I'd like to get a perspective on from our panelists is, what are you seeing in terms of trends, and how are you making predictions towards the future? Would love to give each of you an opportunity to maybe share some of your predictions for 2021 and beyond in the biometrics and digital identity space more broadly. Feel free to get as granular, as broad as you want. I know after maybe the weirdest year of my lifetime, certainly it can be intimidating to make any sort of forward-looking predictions with any sort of high level of assurance. But I always think it's fun to hear folks' thoughts and where they think the puck is headed, shall we say, since we have a couple Canadians with us here today.
Yeah,
Joni, you
sure.
want to kick us off?
I'll kick it off. I'll take the tip off. So I would say that in terms of, first of all, I love that you said level of assurance on the prediction. So the LOA prediction, I don't know, we'll give this a 2.5, which is
fairly strong.
Yeah. So
not enough to open a bank account, though.
That's a real old joke for the NIST people in the audience, but I digress. So in terms of the level of what we think on the predictions, I do think that there is, with regard to the biometrics, there's another piece of the puzzle, which is around the policy for how we use these technologies and how we use something like the biometric. And so I think we're going to see, as a future prediction, I think we're going to see continued use of the biometric. We're going to see that become more ubiquitous. We're going to see more opportunities to use it for authentication, as well as to pair it for authorization as well. So I think that's only going to be on the growth trend. I think in terms of the policy side, there's going to be overarching evolution of policy, both in your federal policy as well as your more local policy, your state or province, in terms of how that data is stored, managed, and used, and what's appropriate around it. And I think around that usage, and I think where that policy needs to go, and I think where it will go, and what something we're advocating for, is that we need to have parity in terms of empowerment, to user and subject empowerment with regard to data about them and how they use it. And so if there is an authoritative source on your biometric, we would have policy that says that we have the privacy protections, we have the privacy controls, and you, citizen or resident, are empowered to use that authoritative biometric for your choosing in the ecosystems that you would like to. And so I don't think we're there yet on the data empowerment side of the equation. I think the privacy is being very well advocated for, and that will continue. So I think we'll see some movement on policy that actually empowers people for use on authoritative data, including a biometric.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I'd agree completely. I think we will see more governments using the source of truth. You know, the government is the custodian of your identity. We represent that identity with a card or a passport or something physical, and this, you know, these things were designed for the real world. You know, you can show it when you turn up somewhere to prove that you are who you claim to be. And technology has done a good job in trying to re-digitize that data. You know, you can scan that ID document and pull out the photo and OCR the text. But really, that is a very wasteful process. You're going from a digital representation of identity to a physical printed card with security features that were designed for the physical world, going back into a digital form that can make mistakes. There's the opportunity for, you know, fraudulent activity to occur. And we're seeing governments around the world move to skipping that process altogether. So Singapore last year introduced biometrics into their national digital identity program. Australia just the other day announced that they're doing the same. The DMV Modernization Act in the US was passed in December. That says that you can use the image on file as long as you do the relevant fraud checks to verify an individual when upgrading to Real ID. NIST 863 version 4, which defines you know, the rules around using biometrics, levels of assurance, and that sort of thing, is imminently going to come out. The next version in draft will come out. They've been taking comments all of last year, so that will define things going forward. So I think governments both regulating and actually making use of the data that they have on their citizens, and, you know, holding that data on behalf of the citizens, they're going to be empowering their citizens to use that to, you know, to produce a much safer and more user-friendly process for verifying their identity in the digital world.
So I'll agree with both Joni and Joe here. I'm going to make a bit of a practical prediction. 2020, like you, Cam, was a very special year and impacted us all. And it made us, and it made a lot of financial institutions realize that we cannot rely on in-person banking anymore. And a lot of the solutions we have been building in digital rely on branches, or for general, in case something goes wrong and we would say, oh, we couldn't identify you, you must go to a branch. Can't do that anymore, can't rely on branches. Customers are not able or not willing to go to branches anytime or all the time. Some of them don't. And as a result, we are moving towards having processes that are 100% potentially digital, online. And that's my prediction, which is we will not build solutions that require a customer to go to a physical channel if they want. If a customer wants to go to a branch, they're welcome to do so. But if they don't want to, they will be able to perform all activities of online remotely. And I think that's where I see in a fairly short term the whole industry going.
Wonderful.
I think just
go ahead, Joe.
One more prediction from me. It occurred to me. I think we will see deepfakes being weaponized on systems like this in 2021. We've all seen, you know, Obama and Trump and various other celebrities saying and doing things they didn't do and looking incredibly realistic. Biometric systems obviously assess faces, and the ability for deepfakes to be produced that look and act and respond to challenges in a hyper-realistic way that humans can't tell the difference. It's only a matter of time before the cyber criminals reverse engineer SDKs and APIs and start injecting this video stream directly into these systems. And this is going to be an arms race. And I think we're going to see this. We've seen a lot of fraud in 2020, relatively low tech fraud, you know, people holding up photos and masks and people trying to spoof the system in that way. I think in 2021, we're going to see the shift to a more digital attack, not simply holding physical things up, but actually, you know, injecting data directly into the video streams. And that is a much more scalable attack that you know, we need to be ready for, and we're putting a lot of focus into that. So just thought I'd add that at the last point, not to be too down, but I think it's going to be real.
No, that's a great and a perfect segue to the Q&A portion. A number of the questions that have been coming in have been around deepfakes, and I guess I'll broaden it out just a little bit because I think you did a great job of hitting on deepfakes specifically. What do we see as the biggest threat to the continued adoption of facial biometrics?
I can, I'm sure, Joe, you'll have a great expert view on that. Maybe I'll share the view as a bank as we look at facial biometrics. It's very powerful and we see a lot of benefits of it. And actually, coupled with other solutions, it really enhances security. However, it's not without risks. And one of them is storing and securing personal information. Inherently, storing a picture of your face or your thumbprint is a high risk solution. We say biometrics is a password that you cannot change. And so if it gets breached, your biometrics is out forever. And that's very concerning. So the way data is stored is critical. And in fact, we try to minimize the storing of it. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is often biometrics will be, particularly facial recognition and facial verification, will be leveraging models. And these models, they are trained, machine learning models are trained by humans, and they end up often having a bias. We're very concerned about that. And so we're very careful monitoring the bias of our models and making sure that we minimize that bias. And the good news is that this technology allows to measure the bias very, very accurately. And so we can really watch it. But these are things that are important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of bias, NIST is doing a great job in actually providing a framework for testing. So we can, the algorithms of today, face matching algorithms are extremely good. And actually the big focus now is on is making sure that they are, all the biases removed from them and then being monitored as they're upgraded so that it doesn't creep in. In terms of storing biometric data, to pick up on that point, it's a really good point. I've heard people who said that they don't trust the government to store their biometric data, but actually they have the picture of them in the DMV or the passport database already, so that it's already happening. We personally at iProve, we don't believe that storing biometric data any longer than necessary is the right way to go. And so if the user isn't coming back to authenticate, all data gets deleted. If the user is authenticating in the future, we just store the biometric templates. So these are representations of the biometric where you can't reverse it back to the image. So you can't get back, a human can't recognize the person from that biometric template. And actually attacks on these systems are where I think the biggest threats are going to be. If you can find a photo of someone online and turn that into an attack, that is the biggest concern. So one of our approaches is to produce a one-time biometric so that every authentication is different. It's effectively a challenge and response mechanism, so that if you were to capture the data from a past authentication, it would never work in a future authentication. So that's one of the mechanisms we employ to protect against that. But I think we're going to see that's the attack we're going to see, is people submitting data that they have obtained from an image, from LinkedIn, from Facebook, augmenting it, manipulating it, producing a deep fake, and sending that into the system to see if they can get it to pass, by spoofing it.
Yeah, and I think just to add in, I agree with all of those points, and it may not have explicitly been said, but the loss of public trust and public confidence in these tools. So if all of that is not managed, public trust is very difficult to regain. Yeah.
And this is a bit of a follow-on, but another topic that's trending in the questions is around regulation. How do we see biometrics technologies interfacing with the growing consumer privacy enhancements that are coming across the bow, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Canada? Do we think that data privacy and kind of privacy preservation can go hand in hand with the use of facial biometrics if done and implemented correctly?
Yeah, I'll take a little bit on that. From the from the Canadian side, we have seen a number of privacy modernization approaches. We've also seen a bill that's up here in Canada called Canada's Digital Charter Implementation Act. That's Bill C11 at the federal level. One of the things that we've taken note of in that bill, which addresses some privacy and consumer protection as well, is that the scope is largely focused on the private sector handling of data and what expectations are and can and should be of Canadians with regard to the way that private sector handles this data. I think one of the things that we see within DIAC is that there is an opportunity here, and that we know that privacy and security are family mates. Sometimes they're getting along and sometimes they're not. And so if we look at the picture as being a prioritization on privacy as data protection, security as data protection as well, the piece of that puzzle that is missing is the empowerment of the subject. And so we are pushing forward that while we continue to protect and enhance privacy, data, and personal data protection and security, we must also build in the empowerment so that where this data exists, when this data exists, that Canadians know about it, whether that's in the public sector and the private sector, and that they can actually take action, whether that's to protect and not share their data or to make utility of their data with a trusted source, which that trust can be determined in a number of ways. So I do think that the privacy and security regulatory modernization, we're advocating that addresses the data empowerment that is required for subjects, both in public and the private sector.
Yeah, I think, in some ways, the devil is always in the details. I think just about any technology can be implemented in a way that's flagrantly violative of privacy, and some technologies that I think in some ways are pilloried as being inherently non-privacy preserving can be implemented in the right ways. But again, it's all, the devil is in the details. If we have time, I'd like to hit one quick question to wrap, and I guess that would just to open it up to my guests here and share any final thoughts that they want to hit on. I will say, for anyone who asked questions in the QA that we didn't hit on, please continue submitting those. We would love to put those to our panelists offline, so they will see them. We just cannot hit on them in this session. My son is very upset about that as well, it seems. Franklin, we'll start with you. Any closing thoughts?
I'm going to say, like a lot of things in security, biometrics is one step in the chain. And I'm going to go back to the concept of LOA, of level of assurance. When we validate the identity of someone, we will not rely just on biometrics. It will be a key aspect of it, but among others. And to use an example, if we can have the future, or it's actually coming very quickly as we envision it, is if we can have matching my face to the picture on my driver's license, and then at the same time, if I can ping the DMV files and validate that this driver's license is actually in service and valid, and at the same time I can authenticate myself with my bank, I here have 3 sources of data that are confirming I am who I say I am, and that is a pretty stronger LOA. That's the way we're thinking about it, and as you can tell, biometrics is playing a key role, but it's embedded in a chain of control. That's how we think about it.
I would, to build on that, I would say biometrics is a key role in that kind of process. But there's more to it when you actually look at the biometric piece. So face matching is all well and good and is an important part, but you have to be sure that the face that you're using to match is a real face. The fact that you can get a picture of anyone's face online pretty much means that the traditional kind of secrecy model that we often think about it just doesn't work for faces. It'd be pretty hard to get a picture of your fingerprint, not impossible, but quite hard. That's not the case for faces. So you have to ensure that the face is real. And that is where you want to look at using systems that can provide liveness assurance or genuine presence assurance to capture an image of the person, but that you know that person is real, they're right there right now, and then of course that they're the correct person with face matching. So that's, biometrics is important, but you have to be able to rely on the image you get when you're utilizing effectively untrusted devices on potentially compromised networks where the user is an attacker. It's the most hostile, potentially hostile environment you can imagine. Creating trust in that environment is a very hard thing to do.
And look, it's hard to add to the great comments from Joe and Franklin before him. So I would say, yeah, support their perspectives. I would say that the space around biometrics and how they're used in the economy and by public and private sector will continue to evolve. The identity story is one that continues to evolve over time with culture and norms and technology and how we use these tools. So I think we need to continue to invest in the standards development, how we work together. We need to continue to invest in something like the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. We do have many of the tools available to us already from a standards perspective, but there's still work to be done, and this file needs investment over time and will continue to do so. So I would encourage you to get involved in your local standards developing effort, and if you're in Canada, you can work with Joe and Franklin as part of our membership in the DIAC. It really does take a village to move this work forward in a way that's beneficial for all of your stakeholders. So we'd love to work with you.
Wonderful. Well, a big thank you to all of our panelists, Joni, Joe, Franklin. This was a really fantastic conversation. Looking forward to seeing what other questions come in that we weren't able to hit on. And we hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.